e la condivisione. Allora, vediamo, devo condividere questo. No, questo. Allora, presentazione dalla diapositiva corrente. Ok. Allora, proviamo a cominciare. Non si sono collegati altri. Vediamo un attimo. Pare di no. Siamo sempre. Ok. Allora, so the next topic I'm going to discuss is related with the birth of algebra. We insisted a lot on the fact that the ancient Greeks were very proficient in geometry, made marvelous constructions. In the case of Archimedes, almost came to start analytical mathematics. Archimedes, in some sense, as we said, was the first to understand something about the notion of a limit. He almost made integrals in a particular way by calculating his area and so on, but he never solved any equation. And the very idea of algebraic equations, I mean, differential equation, of course, were absolutely to come because no one had yet invented differential calculus, but even algebraic calculus, even the notion of algebraic equation was essentially unknown to the Greeks. When I say essentially, I mean that a very special figure, very influential altogether in the history of mathematics, namely Diophantus, almost came to the idea of equations. His book on arithmetics, La Arithmetica, deals with the solution of problems that we can consider as algebraic problems, as solutions of equations. And he classified many of these problems. As usually, the Greeks expressed the problems by means of words. The notation was not yet developed, but Diophantus was almost coming to something like mathematical notations, because he invented some symbol to represent squares and to represent cubes of unknowns. But it was not yet clear the very notion of unknown. And the way he posed his equations is very unfamiliar to us, because, for instance, he wrote something like two symbols in sequence, and for us, obviously, that means product. For Diophantus meant sum. So reading Diophantus books is very difficult, of course, for us. Let us, but it certainly is the ancient scientist who came closer to establish algebraic ideas. Now, let us give a short history of his famous books. Apparently, his book was composed of 13 books, as usual. Books, biblios in Greek meant the roll, because I mean, at that time, a paper had not been invented yet, and people, as you know, were writing either on papyrus or on skins, on so-called pergamena, that comes from skin of animals and was very expensive. So 13 books was his the total of what he wrote, and his books, as usual, were edited by the Byzantines, and one editor and commenter of Diophantus was the famous Hypatia, the daughter of Theon from Alexandria, the lady who was killed by sort of Christian fanatics. So that also gave us a bound on his lifespan. For many, many years, well, essentially until the end of the 19th century, the life of Diophantus was not historically located even precisely in some century. It was certainly after, say, Eratosthenes and company, because there is no mention of his work before, and it was certainly earlier than Hypatia. That meant that we had an error bar of about 4 centuries. The location of Diophantus' life and hence work, was established, but not with complete security. There are still some doubts, but more or less 90% of philologists and scholars of the history of mathematics now tend to agree that he lived in the 3rd century after Christ. The reason why we know that, essentially the basis for this establishing this date, is the fact that the famous philologist and mathematician Paul Tannery, who lived at the end of the 19th century, and he was one of the main modern student of Diophantus' works. He found, Paul Tannery found a letter. I hope we can see it. I don't understand why it does not go on. Oh, no. Okay, here it is. He found a letter written by Michael Psellus. Michael Psellus is a famous Byzantine scholar who lived at the beginning of the 11th century, namely at the time Basilius II, the most famous and most important emperor of Byzantium in the Middle Ages, the emperor who re-established Byzantine power all over the Balkans, in Sicily, in southern Italy, and on Asia Minor. It was the maximum extension that the Byzantine Empire reached once again after the losses that had been continuous after the advent of Islam. Michael Psellus, he was probably the most relevant figure of Byzantine culture all over the history of the Byzantine Empire. He was a historian. He was, to some extent, also a geometer and a mathematician. He was a scholar proficient in law. And his most famous work is the chronology of Byzantine emperors, but he wrote much more. I mean, on most of the subjects that you can imagine. He had a very, very large and profound culture, and he was a defender of Hellenic, he called it Hellenic culture. He wrote in a marvelous, perfect classical Greek, and he was also a politician, because he occupied at several occasions, very prominent positions at the court of the Byzantine emperors, like a sort of chancellor or diplomat and so on. So he is a very prominent figure, and he wrote a lot of letters, of course, also official ones. And one of these letters by Psellus was found by Paul Tannery at the end of the 19th century in the library of Escurial in Madrid. And the topic of the letter is not really important, and I should say that I also forgot, if I have a new, who was the person to whom he was writing. But the important thing is that he mentioned in this letter the fact that a certain bishop, whose life is known from the history of the church, his date of birth and death are known, a bishop in Middle East at the time when it was still Byzantine, who was interested in mathematics, and to whom Diophantus dedicated his book Ta Arithmetica. This is mentioned by, in connection with some topic, by Michael Psellus. This made clear that Diophantus was more or less a contemporary, otherwise he would not dedicate a book to his own friend and send it to him, as he said, if it was not living at the same time. So Diophantus from Alexandria lived more or less in the 3rd century after Christ. So, to be honest, it was not Byzantine, it was still a Roman Empire. Okay, the books of Diophantus were preserved until the end of the Roman Empire and in Byzantine times in their Greek source, but they were lost in the West. And they were later, as many others books, translated into Arabic by Fusta ibn Luca. I will tell you something more about this scholar in the 9th century. And then, as many other books were translated from Arabic into Latin at a later time in Toledo. This is the story I'm going to tell you today, and probably also to the next lecture, because all this is connected with the birth of algebra. And in order to understand how difficult it was to come to what nowadays we consider elementary and almost childish, we have also to consider not only the lives and the tales of books, but we have to understand in general that period of time that I like to call Byzantine Arabic, because it was in Byzantine Arabic time, and with an exchange between the two, that on one side ancient science was partially preserved, and on the other side some important advances were made which make the beginning of modern algebra and of mathematics. So my next to finish with Diophantus, of the 13 books, only 6 were preserved, translated into Arabic, recuperated later also in Greek, and translated into Latin. The other 6 were considered lost. The Latin translation, most famous, directly from the Greek, was done in the beginning of the 16th century by a French scholar who translated into Latin. And the copy of Diophantus, Latinized by this French scholar, is the famous book who belonged to Pierre Fermat, where on the side of, while you're reading and studying Diophantus' book, he wrote the famous sentence about the 3rd theorem, Fermat's 3rd theorem, that, as you know, was not proven for about 500 years, and was finally proven only at the end of the 20th century by the English mathematician, who of course made an enormous advance with this proof. But the proof is an entire book, is extremely complicated. And up to the present time, we don't know how whether Fermat was joking by saying that it was evident and simple to prove it, or whether he had some incredible idea that no one so far has discovered. The proof, the existing proof, is tremendously complicated. Okay. Moreover, in the end of the 60s of the 20th century, 68, I think, a Turkish scholar discovered two of the last missing books of Diophantus in Baghdad, but only in an Arabic version. The original Greek was never recovered. So, having given you the theme, you will now understand why I will stop for a moment with the history of mathematics, and I will try to give you chronological information about those important years in order to get an overview of the centuries that were the cradle of algebra. This part of history typically is very superficially taught in all European schools. And particularly what happens is that even if some notions are present, a parallel chronology is never presented. And I think instead that having an parallel overview of chronology is extremely important to understand what was going on in the world at the end of the Roman Empire and with the beginning of Islam and further. So now we will stop a moment and we turn to another. So I stop the condivision of this and we go to another object, which I hope you can see. Do you see a PDF file on your screens at the moment?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a file that we already used when we discussed the models of Archita and Eudorso. But now we come to chronology. I have summarized chronology with comments, mentioning on the first column the year, and then mentioning what happened in the East with the Arabs, what happened in the West with Spain, what happened in Byzantium, and made some comments. So we have to understand that at the beginning of the 6th century, so immediately after Justinian, emperor of Byzantium, was Zeno, in Italian Zenone. This, unfortunately, these slides are in Italian, but I can mention for you what is written. So, as you know, the in the West, we had already the barbarian kingdoms. In the East, the empire was very strong, but there were all these disputes within Christianity, and something extremely relevant for the history of science that very few people, at least to my knowledge, know in the West, is that the sect, the Christian sect called Nestorians, the Nestorian Christians, were condemned and exiled from the Byzantine. There was a very strong center of culture, philosophy, and theology in what now is between Iraq and Turkey, in a city called Edessa, not Odessa, Edessa, and which was really a center of culture, but it was all the scholars in that city and neighboring region were Nestorians, and they were exiled from Emperor Zin. What happened is that they went to the Persian Empire. That was under the dynasty. The last dynasty was the Sassanid dynasty, and Khosrow the First, who was a very strong opponent of the Byzantine Empire, but himself, he was had a very deep Greek culture. He was the person that took as guest all these exiled people from Byzantine Empire, and thanks to them, he created in what is presently Iran, in the region of Bassora. I mean, these are these are regions that are famous for the recent wars. Bassora is in Iraq, but it's on the boundary with Iran, and already on the hills, because there begins the chain of the Zagros mountain, the very steep and quite long chain of mountains. On the first slopes of Zagros, there is a city called Gundishapur, which still exists in present time Iran. There, Khosrow the First established what might be called the first university, international university of history. It was an academy where there were something similar to faculties, in particular astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. And the languages that were spoken there were the two main languages of culture of the time. It was not the medieval Persian, that is Pahlavi, But the lectures by all the professors, by quote unquote, were given either in Greek or in Syriac. Syriac is a version of Aramaic. It is a Semitic language that was spoken in Syria, as the name says, and it was the language spoken by people living in northern and central Syria, in Lebanon, and in Palestine as well. It was a very well developed language, and a lot of literature exists in Syriac, and it was the native language of the Nestorians, because they came from their part of the Byzantine Empire, but they also spoke Greek, of course, because Greek was the language of culture as well, and the free language in the whole eastern part of Roman Empire, now Byzantine Empire. So in Gundi Shapur was established the first academy giving regular courses, giving sort of degrees, where there were professors, by quote unquote, coming from Persia, of course. There were a lot of erudites that were scholars that were of Persian origin, but also Nestorians from Syria, from other parts of the Byzantine Empire. There were some Indians, as far as we can understand. And apparently there were also a couple of Chinese scholars. And the free language, of course, was Greek. So that was the situation in the 6th century. So clearly in Gundi Shapur and in other cities of Persia, the Greek culture was preserved, and books were written and read, and the texts in ancient mathematics were quite well known and utilized, and even used as textbooks for the students. Now, 622 is the year of the Hegira. So when Muhammad leaves La Mecca, and as we know, that is the beginning of time for Muslim people. But Muhammad was completely unknown to the Byzantine and to the Persians, who were instead entangled at the end of the 6th century and beginning of the 7th century in a very strong, in a very difficult, very cruent and quite expensive in human resources, in economic resources, from all point of views, war. Persians and Romans had always been enemies, and this enmity was inherited by the Byzantine Empire. The Arabs were not even considered. They were some strange savage people at the end of the desert. No one paid attention to them. And the two civilized empires, Persia was very large and strong, and was living on economically on commerce in particular, because not only it had the resources, but it was the connecting entity, civilized entity, between the West, that meant now Byzantines and previously Roman Empire, and the East, because through India they were even connected with China. And for instance, silk was traded to the Romans from China and to the Byzantines via Persia. So these were the two main powers of the day, and they were entangled in a very current war that lasted about 20 years. Heraclion, the emperor of Byzantium, eventually won the war. The Persians lost and they had occupied for certain time Palestine. They had to return Palestine to the Byzantine. They had to return almost every conquest they had made. And there was a peace treaty between the two powers. And in order to secure the peace, the still infant emperor of Persia, Sassanid emperor, was given as tutor no one less than the Byzantine emperor. Heraclius became, so to say, the stepfather, the tutor of the infant emperor of Persia. That was a symbol of the victory. But the two empires had come out of the war very much diminished in their military powers. They had suffered a lot of destructions. They had lost a lot of soldiers on both sides, and also their economy was quite quite bad because of the war. That meant that Byzantium was imposing quite strong taxes in order to restore the finances of the central government. And this element is not irrelevant in order to explain the very abrupt invasion of the Arabs and how easily they took over in less than 20, let's say in less than 30 years, all of the Middle East. Because the two opponents, the Byzantines and the Persian, were in very bad economic situation. And some of the populations in Middle East, even if Christians, they, in a certain sense, not really allied, but took the rule of the Arabs as a sort of relief from the very high taxation that the Byzantines were imposing. So you see, in 622, it is the same year when Heraclius wins the war against the Persian and establishes his sovereignty, so to say, protectorate on Persia. And it is the same year when Muhammad leaves La Mecca and the history of Islam begins. 634, namely only 12 years later, in the Battle of Yarmouk, the Arabs destroy the Byzantine army, and Omar, the conqueror, reaches Damascus. And it's incredible. I mean, they came out of nothing, and in 12 years, they had already conquered for themselves all of the Byzantine Middle East. They were finally stopped at the northern boundary of Syria, but that was an enormous conquest. In 638, Jerusalem becomes under Arabian rule, under Muslim rule. And in 639 begins the Arabic conquest of what was the Persian Sassanid Empire. So it is incredible. The Sassanid were able to oppose an army of about 200,000 men to 30,000 Muslim, but were beaten. They retreated on the mountains, so the Arabs were already masters of all ancient Mesopotamia, but they had not yet invaded Iran, let's say, because there were the mountains. So the last emperor, of Persia, retreated in Ekbatana, nowadays Hamadan, I think is called, on the mountains, the ancient capital on the mountains at an elevation of 1,800 meters, and resisted a couple of years still. But then the army was, his army was trapped in some valley, and the Arabs were able to destroy. And so the emperor went to the very far east of his empire in what is called Khorasan. Now, Khorasan, remember this name because it is very, very important for the history of the Middle Ages, for the history of mathematics and of culture in general. The area called Khorasan corresponds more or less to what nowadays are the northern eastern part of Iran, the Republic of Turkmenistan, and the Republic of Uzbekistan. It was a very large region. And this region has a very important role to play in those times, and it is from that region that came at the end algebra. Now, 711 is the year when the Arabs have already conquered all northern Africa, and they cross to Spain. Once again, the conquest of Spain is an incredible story, because in not more than 2 years, they conquer the whole of the Iberic Peninsula, 90% of the Iberic Peninsula, and they transform it into what is called Al-Andalus, which is the present name of Andalusia, but it was the name that the Arabs gave to the Iberic Peninsula. Now, we must also remember that at that time, the Caliphate, Al-Khalif in Arabic means the heir. So the head of the Muslim state coincided with the heir of Muhammad, and so it was both a religious and a political leader. And they like to call the vast territory that now was under their rule Dar al-Islam, namely the home of Islam, and extended from Persia to Spain, covering the Middle East and all Northern Africa. It was an enormous territory. And the dynasty that was ruling, Dar al-Salam, al-Islam, was the Umayyad dynasty, and the capital was Damascus. So an ancient town of Greek origin, Roman origin. But at a certain point, there is something very important, namely the Umayyad dynasty fell, and a new dynasty of caliphs established their rule. It was the dynasty of the Abbasids. And they shifted their capital from the Damascus to what was to be the capital, the new capital of Caliphate, Baghdad, who is a new city. It was constructed first. Sorry. Pronto? Niente team. Usual story. The Caliphate, Abbasid Caliphate, already shifted their center of power to the east, but Baghdad was constructed as a new capital by the Caliph al-Mansur. Al-Mansur was really in 1714. Al-Mansur was born, and he was the head of the new dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, that overthrew the Umayyad dynasty. But theoretically, also Spain would be still obedient to the new caliph. But practically in Spain, the Arabs there went their own way, and at a certain point they declared Cordoba to be the capital of another caliphate under the rule of the last extant descendant of the Umayyad family. So they took the opportunity given by the fall in Damascus and advent of the new dynasty of the Abbasid as an excuse to make themselves independent, declaring their obedience to the old dynasty or Umayyad dynasty. So this is something that has to be taken into account, that at a certain point there was this separation. But Al-Mansur was a very important caliph. Now we will look at the history very closely, in a much closer way, because we come to the important years. He was born in 1714, so just less than 1 century from the beginning of Islam, and only 3 years after the conquest of Spain. 1717 is the time when the Arabs try the last decisive effort against Byzantium, and they come under the walls of Constantinople. Can you hear me? Mi sentite, ragazzi?
Sì, professore, adesso sì.
Sì.
C'è stata un'interruzione momentanea della linea. Probabilmente devo riattivare. No, credo è in corso la registrazione. Devo solo riattivare la condivisione. So, vedete la cronologia ancora? Sì.
Io
Allora,
non ancora.
no?
No, mi dice che sta condividendo adesso lo schermo, però ancora non è
Non
condiviso.
A me dice che è condiviso.
Sì,
Proviamo
sì,
a...
adesso è appena stato condiviso. Adesso si vede.
vabbè, allora è solo un ritardo.
Sì, sì.
Bene, allora io appunto non è che voglio farvi imparare tutte le date storiche, ma I would like that you understand parallel chronology in order to understand what was going on in the world. The middle of the 8th century, which means little more than 100 years after the conquest of Middle East by the Arabs, has parallel events that are very important to understand the whole structure of the period. Marwan as I was saying, the second is the last Umayyad caliph. And it is overthrown by the Abbasid. At the same time, that more or less in the same years, so this is 1750, the death of Marwan II. In the same years, when the Abu Muslim wins against the Oman and overthrows the dynasty, at the same time, the Byzantines are involved in a new war on the other side, because now the enemy of the Byzantines are the Bulgars. The Bulgars who are of Turkey origin. The original Bulgars came from the shores of the Volga, of the southern Volga. They were they were a Turkish tribe, but and for this reason, their leader was called Khan, as later the Bongo Khan. But they mixed with the Slavic people who had penetrated all of the Balkan Peninsula, and present day Bulgars, they speak a Slavic language. Bulgar is a Slavic language quite close to Russian. But so they mixed with the Slavic people, but the ruling class was the class of this Turkish origin people, and they constructed a very strong state in present Bulgaria, but all the southern Balkans were under their rule. And they were very close to Constantinople. They were threatening Constantinople all the time. So Byzantium was in very bad times, because had to face the Bulgars on the northwest and had to face the Arabs on the southeast. But what is important, and I have underlined it, is that Abu Muslim, who came to be the winner of the Umayyads. So he gave the end to the Umayyad dynasty. He was Arab, but he had been, during the Umayyad period, the leader of Khorasan. So of this extremely large territory I mentioned to you, whose native language is the Persian, the medieval Persian, called Pahlavi. You should remember that still to the present day, in Uzbekistan, where there are the historical cities of Samarkanda, of Bukhara, and other important cities, the official language, apart from the Russian that was imposed at the time of the Soviet Union and is still quite spread and used by educated people in the whole country, but the official language is the Uzbek, which is a version of the Turkish language, of course. But many people instead in the marketplace and so still speak Farsi. namely the Iranian Indo-European language, which is the same language of the Tajiki. The Tajikistan is a Persian-speaking state. There, the Farsi is the official language. So you have to understand that this Khorasan, an enormous region, was Persian. It was, and it was important region, had a lot of resources, notwithstanding the fact that part of it nowadays is a desert, but it had absorbed Greek culture because it was conquered by Alexander the Great. So for a certain time, it was under the rule of the Seleucid. For instance, a city that is very important in our story, Marv, which now is only just a heap of destroyed stones, was one of the largest cities of the world, something like 400,000 people, which was a very large city for the time. And it was a center of culture, of Hellenistic culture. And at some point, it was even called Alexandria in honor of Alexander the Great. And in what was called the Bactriana, there was a surviving Greek kingdom up to the time of the Muslim. It was still independent, and they used Greek. And then it was overthrown. So I underline this to tell you that Khorasan, that region, takes the lead on the Muslims. They were Muslim, but now the ruling class from in the new caliphate is of Persian origin, or it is Arabic origin, but intermixed with the Persians. And I should mention that by the same time, we have the end of the Byzantine Exarchate in Italy, with the conquest of Ravenna by the Longobards. So you see, it is a geopolitical change of extreme importance. The Arabs in Spain become essentially independent, and they make their own world. We will see. In Italy, the Longobards, so German-speaking people, take the lead and expel the Byzantine almost entirely. The Byzantines are confronted with the Bulgars on the north, and in the east, the Caliphate is going to enter its golden age, the golden age of medieval Arabic culture. That, however, is Arabic only because all the people have become Muslims, and Arabic is the language of the Al-Quran, is the language of religion, and it is a sort of imposed language on everyone. But under the Arabic, so to say, paint, there are the Persians, the scholars, and the leaders of this golden period of Arabic culture are actually Persians, or many of them are Persians. And that is due to the relevance that in the Caliphate takes this region of Khorasan. So in 753, Al-Mansur becomes Caliph, and his opponent is Constantine V in Byzantium. That has a sort of renaissance. Constantine V takes again under Byzantine rule most of southern Italy, what remains of the Balkans, and they are all these provinces are put under direct rule from Constantinople. But now begins the story of Khorasan pretending to play an important role, which means the Persians accept Muslim religion and accept Arabic language, but they understand that they are much stronger because of their old tradition, and they would like to play a much more important role. And in fact, at the end, this happens. Al-Mansur in 762 constructs Baghdad. He wants to construct a new capital for the Caliphate. And imagine who are the engineers, who are the artists, the technicians that construct at an incredible velocity the new city. They are all from Byzantium. The Byzantines work for the Arabs, and they construct their new city, which is round-shaped, meaning it's a symbol. At the center of the city, there is the palace of the Caliph, and then there are radial streets that go to the four doors, and it is a splendid city, no question about it. And it's the symbol of the new Islam. That is geometrical. The Arabs give a lot of emphasis to geometry, and so they wanted their round-shaped capital to have a lot of geometrical beauty, let's say like that. Now, the successor of Al-Mansur is Harun al-Rashid, essentially he is the nephew, sorry, the grandson, not the nephew. He is the grandson of Al-Mansur. And he is completely Arabic because his mother was a Yemenite slave. But he gets a very much refined education. Where? In the region around Tehran, because he was nominated in his youth, he was nominated governor of that famous Khorasan, important region. And in this important region, Harun al-Rashid receives an excellent education in history, geography, rhetoric, music, and he learns also some foreign languages. Apparently, he could speak some Greek. Our hero, the hero of our mathematical history, mathematical tale, was born in the year 780. And where was he born? He was born in the city of Kiev. Excuse me. This was only a message. He was born in the city of Khiva, which at the present time is the second largest city of Uzbekistan. At the time, Khiva was a minor city, very peripheral city of no importance. Later, it became important in the 10th century. But it was not too far, something like a few hundred kilometers from Marv, which was really the center of Khorasan. And clearly, Al-Khwarizmi is a Persian. His native language was Pahlavi. We know very few things about his life, unfortunately. But I have to explain to you, and that will help you a lot in understanding what was the system of nomenclature, how Arabic names were given. They're usually very long, and we think, oh gosh, what does it mean? They had a first name that can be Muhammad or Musa, that Moses, or Jafar or something like that. And that was their typical name, like our first names. But then they used patronymic. That was introduced with the word Ibn. So if I say Muhammad ibn Musa, means Muhammad, son of Jafar. But they had also another interesting thing. Before their name, they would say, you find a lot of this thing, Abu, and then another name. That is only Arabic. It means father of. So if I say Abu Jafar Muhammad ibn Musa, that is the name of Khwarizmi, means the father of Jafar, Mohammed, the son of Moses. Very strange. Finally, what we would call the family name actually was a geographical name. Al-Khwarizmi means the one from Khwarizm. Khwarizm is the name of that region. It's Khorasan in Arabic language, in Persian language. So he was clearly a Persian, Arabized Persian, with almost no doubt his native language, the language he spoke with his mother, father, and with his son Jafar, was Pahlavi. But of course, he was utilizing for his writing Arabic. Nevertheless, in Marv, due to the emigration of these scholars from Gundi Shapar, this is a story I didn't tell you, but now I tell you. I mentioned that Gundi Shapur was the region where probably the first university of the world was created by the Sassanids. When the Arabs came, all the scholars from Gundi Shapur abandoned the city and they went north because there was still a Persian rule. And they went to that city of Marv, which was the last city where died the last emperor of Sassanid, Yazad, I think was his name, Yazad III, the last Sassanid emperor. He was assassinated under the pay of some Arabic people. Found it the easiest way was to assassinate him. But therefore, the Greek culture that had originally come from eastern part of Turkey, northern part of Syria, Syrian Greek culture that had emigrated 2 centuries before to Gundi Shapur, then it went up to Marv, and Marv is the city where Al-Khwarizmi was educated, so it is almost certain that he spoke also Greek. He learned Greek and possibly also Syriac in Marv. He clearly spoke Arabic, and he had an excellent education in that city. That city, that was the center of power of another very important family. The family named the Barkmenids. Now, most of you certainly remember the 1001 Night, famous medieval collection of novels. And you certainly remember that there was a Jafar that was the chancellor of the Caliph. The Caliph was Harun al-Rashid, of course. And at a certain point, he was overthrown and executed, this Jafar. Now, who were Jafar? Jafar was one of the exponents of this very important family called the Barmecid. They were Persians, were entirely, fully Persians, and their center of power was the Khorasan, and even some, they were originally from a city in Afghanistan, and apparently, their family had been of Buddhist religion, or more or less, it is not clear, Buddhist or the religion of the ancient Persian, that Zoroastrian religion. So this family that had its center of power was completely Persian, and its center of power in Khorasan became very important in Baghdad because they were very rich, they were merchant, and they occupied very important position in the administration of the caliphate. So the Persian influence in Baghdad was extremely important. And Harun al-Rashid at a certain point made one of these Barkmesid to be executed with pretension that he had made some that he was a traitor, just because they were becoming too powerful. The Barmecids have another important role in history. Only for that, everyone should remember them, because during the end of the 700s, the end of the 8th century, there was a struggle in that eastern part of the caliphate, at the border with the Central Asia, at the border with nowadays Kyrgyzstan, with the Chinese. At that time, in China, there was the ruling dynasty was the Tang dynasty, and it was the Buddhist time, when China became Buddhist, officially Buddhist. Then they came back to Confucianism, and there was, and they were trying to penetrate Central Asia, the Chinese. They sent a very strong army, and there was a very important battle between the Arabs, the Islamic troops, and the Chinese. The Arabs won the day, at the victory, and that was a stop to the Chinese penetration in the West. The Chinese no longer try to penetrate further in the West. But as a consequence of that battle, a lot of Chinese prisoners were taken. And among these Chinese prisoners, soldiers, there were some expert paper makers. As you know, paper had been invented in China, but was absolutely unknown in the West. The Barmecid ruler of that region was so smart that I don't know how he communicated with this Chinese. Probably there was some interpreter, someone who could translate. And he came to know about paper from these workers, common soldiers who, before being soldiers, had been workers in paper factory. So he learned from them the secret how to make paper. And he constructed the first factory of paper of the Western world in Samarkand. And it is from Samarkand that paper extended then to the rest of the Muslim world and came also to the West. So it was a very important technical revolution, because and very important for culture, because paper is much cheaper than papyrus or other support for writing. And our hero, namely Al-Khwarizmi, was born in those years, and now he came mixed with very important events in the caliphate. When Harun al-Rashid, the caliph of 1001 Nights, had two sons. And one of these sons was what later became the Caliph al-Mamun. But Al-Mamun was not selected by Harun al-Rashid as heir for the very simple reason that he had a Arabic father, relative of Harun al-Rashid, Harun al-Rashid himself in this case, but he was son of a Persian mother, one of the concubines of the Caliph. And so Harun al-Rashid was suspicious of Al-Mamun because he was half Persian. And he preferred Al-Mamin, who was the other son, whose mother was instead also Arabic. So in his last wills, he selected the other son as Caliph, but he left as a legacy the life government of Khorasan to Al-Mamun. Al-Mamun had been brought up in Khorasan under the rule of his father, Caliph Harun al-Rashid. He was governor of Khorasan, and he had absorbed entirely and completely the culture of Khorasan. So he was Philo-Hellenic, so to say, in culture, and he was very much learned in philosophy, in history, and all the rest. As you can imagine, things never go the way father wants, and the last will of Harun al-Rashid was written in 1802 when he went on his pilgrimage to La Mecca. So just at the same time when Charlemagne became emperor in the West. And when Harun al-Rashid died, some years later, in 1809, Al-Amin and Al-Mamun came to war because Al-Amin wanted to remove his brother from the governorship of Khorasan, and that again stresses how powerful that region was, and the Caliph didn't want his brother to have such a power. So he sent an army of 40,000 soldiers to arrest Al-Mamun and to bring him back to Baghdad. But things went completely in the opposite direction. This is more or less contemporary to the major disaster that the Byzantines suffered on the western frontier with the Bulgars. The Nicephorus I, the very emperor of Byzantium, was killed. All his army was destroyed by the Bulgarian army, and the Khan, the Bulgar Khan, made with the head of the dead emperor made a cup to drink wine for himself. That was the last humiliation for the Byzantines. So you see, the moment when there is unrest in the caliphate is the moment when Byzantium is also in very bad waters. And probably Byzantium was not conquered by the Arabians because they had their own problems at the moment, internal problems between the two brothers. So the history went in the opposite direction, because the army sent by Al-Amin to arrest Al-Mamun was instead beaten by the soldiers of Al-Mamun, and a certain general who clearly is also Tabit, is also a Persian, does the opposite. After destroying the army sent by Al-Amin, goes to Baghdad, takes by Baghdad, takes Al-Amin under arrest and makes him to be executed. And Al-Mamun, who still is in the east, in Khorasan, becomes the new caliph. So Al-Mamun establishes his power from Persia, is half Persian. He goes to Baghdad and he takes a very important decision. And there is a legend behind this decision. The legend is transmitted to us by the person who is called the Islam Titus Livius. Is Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari is the most important historian of the Islamic tradition. He was active 70, 80 years after what I am telling you. And he wrote a history of the world, a universal history from the ancient kings to present times in 40 books. It is an enormous encyclopedic tale, very important source, but certainly it contains a lot of also of gossips and more or less mythical events. One of them is probably it might be true, but it might be a little bit educated. History of the dream, of the caliph dream. Maybe it is true, but it was a device of Al-Mamun to convince and to put under how to say under pressure the pure Muslim people and the so to say the fanatics, the Islam fanatics. So Al-Mamun told, according to Al-Tabari, the following story. He was sleeping, and during his sleep, it was almost light, he had a vision. A guy that was coming with a lot of light, like a spirit, dressed in white and with a beard, appeared to him and told him, have a nice day, Caliph Al-Mamun. And Al-Mamun asked him, who are you? And he said, I am Aristotle. And the Caliph asked him, why are you coming to me? And he said, the spirit of Aristotle said, I'm coming to answer your question. And the Caliph says, what is my question? He said, you perfectly know what is your question, but you pretend not knowing because you want me to mention it. Your question is the following: whether it is more important to be pious and religious or to follow the laws of mind, study, and use reason. And you are not sure what is the right answer. I tell you that there is no conflict between these two things, because the human mind is made by God. And if you follow pure reason and philosophy, that's the best way to honor God. So it was a clearly well-invented story to put the religious people, those who had burnt the Library of Alexandria, for instance, under defense, and to develop his project. What was Al-Mamun project? Al-Mamun project was fantastically modern and very important for the history of the world. He created in Baghdad a new institution that in Arabic was called Bait al-Hikmah, that means the house of wisdom, which was a sort of academy, but more than an academy, was a center of translation. In fact, there was a follow-up in the story of the dream. After Aristotle had explained to Al-Mamun that following reason and developing science was the rightest way to honor God, he told him, look, you have to take all the scholars from all over the world. Doesn't matter whether they are Arabic, they are Greek, they are Persians. Everyone who is an intelligent man, you should try to collect and to bring to the house of wisdom that you have to build. And the main task that you have to ask the scholars is to take all the ancient books in Greek, in Syriac, dealing with science, and translate them into Arabic. You have to construct a library in Baghdad, preserving all the human knowledge that was transmitted to us by our ancestors. So Al-Mamun had a clear project, namely that of translating into Arabic and make accessible to everyone who belonged to Dar al-Islam, his state, the knowledge of ancient Greece, but also of ancient Persia. And in order to do that, he needed translators, people who were proficient in Greek and Arabic at the same time. So one of the persons and the main figure that he wanted in Baghdad was Al-Khwarizmi, that he had certainly met in Marv. And he was the prominent figure in Bait al-Hikmah at the beginning, and he also continued to be there. But there, Kusta ibn Luca, which is clearly the Arabization of a Greek name, Costas, son of Luca, and he was a Christian, was another important figure in. There was Tabit, who was the translator of Ptolemy, and he was instead an historian Christian, speaking Arabic. And there were the three Ibana al-Musa, which means the sons of Mosè. They were three scientists, mathematicians, that lost from northern Syria, so probably also of Syriac origin, whose father died when they were young, and they had Al-Mamun as tutor. And the three of them became all mathematicians. Some of them wrote a commentary to Archimedes, and they gave also contributions, new contributions in the field of geometry and astronomy. And so this center of culture in Baghdad was created by Al-Mamun, utilizing mostly non-Arabic but Arabic-speaking scholars. And it is in these years when Al-Mamun was ruling that Al-Khwarizmi, prominent figure in Bait al-Hikmah, wrote his essay, whose name is very long. It's Kitab al-Muqtasar Firsa al-Habr wal-Muqabala, which means a little essay on al-Habr and al-Muqabala. And we will see what it means. This is the main text in algebra. In fact, the very name algebra comes from this word al-Habr, utilized in his title by Al-Khwarizmi. And it is the first place in the history of mathematics where the clear notion of what is an equation arises. And the equations Al-Khwarizmi dealt with are essentially second-order equations. And we will see in the next lecture how difficult it was to arrive at the simple solution formula that every school kid learns at the age of 12. And in fact, it does not appear in the book, which is mostly written in words. But the words can be translated into symbols. And as we will see, Al-Khwarizmi, first of all, invented some procedures that for us are trivialities, namely how to shift one term of the equation by changing sign and putting it on the other side of the equation, canceling equal terms, etc. But all that had to be discovered, because for the ancient and for the Arabic still of that time, the number were only positive numbers. No one had invented the notion of negative numbers so far. And even the name of the unknown had not yet been invented, and it was invented with the Arabic name by Al-Khwarizmi, and he called it La Cosa. The translation of the Arabic word is the thing that you have to find. And he had a special name for the square of the thing. And he is responsible for naming the thing root. And root is still the name we use nowadays for roots of an equation. The solution was the root. We will see that in the next lecture. This treaty was written in some years between 1813 and 1830. We are not sure. We have very poor information about the life of Al-Khwarizmi. We only know when he was born. We only know that he was called to Baghdad from Caliph al-Mamun, that he was part of Bait al-Hikmah, and we have some indirect information about the time he died. We don't know about his family, but we know his works. He is responsible for something even no less important. He wrote a book that was later translated as Numeri Indorum. It is the book where he exposes the notation that we still use for numbers, with the 0 and the digits. And he calls them the numbers of the Indians, because we call them Arabic numbers. But this is wrong, because it is Arabic only because the book where the system, the notational system that we still use was explained, was written in Arabic by Al-Khwarizmi. And it came to the West via Toledo, as I will explain to you in the next lecture. But the invention is of the Indian mathematicians, and probably in Baghdad, through Khorasan, there was contact with Indian scholars, and among them, one prominent mathematician is Arrabbiata, like spaghetti all'arrabbiata, who is contemporary of Al-Khwarizmi. And probably they were in touch. So the Indian mathematics, the Persian, and the Greek, they all were preserved through this fantastic operation organized by the Caliph al-Mamun that translated all possible books, including Ptolemy, into Arabic language. And he made an incredibly important library in Baghdad. The Library of Baghdad had an estimated number of books that is probably a little bit less than 500,000. Nothing survived. The history of science and culture is continuously signed by the destruction of libraries. The Arabs destroyed Alexandria, where all, an incredible amount of essentially all of the ancient science, literature, and etc. was preserved, and they burned it. But the resurrection and the preservation of books was done by the Arabs in Baghdad. But their library was destroyed in the 13th century and was burnt by the Mongols. Baghdad was completely destroyed by the Mongols, and also their library was burnt. So fortunately, some of these texts survived in the Arabian world, and in particular, they were preserved in Spain, as we will see. But also in Spain, there was a burning of a library, unfortunately. This is the sad history of science and culture, that periodically there are innovators that think that books have to be destroyed. And in my own taste, and that is my last sentence for this lecture, is this monument that nowadays exists in Berlin, more or less in front of the von Humboldt University. In this square is the square also on the side facing the library, and it is the square where the brown how they're called, shirts, the Nazist equivalent of the black shirts in Italy. I think in 38, or I cannot remember exactly the date, the year. They made a falon. They burnt books from the library. They took books that were considered not proper and not in line with the Nazist ideology. They made a pile in the center of the square, and they burned them. And the place where they burned them, these books, there is now this monument, which I consider one of the most symbolic and nicest in the world. It is simply a hall at the center of the square with the glass that covers the hall. And when there is daylight under the hall, in the hall, you see empty shelves, and there is painted in white, and there is only a plate in metal with some sentence from the German poet Heine that says the following: when it comes to the point that someone burns books, it will follow that he will burn also people. No prophecy was better than this of Heine, written some 100 years before the Holocaust. But this is not a new story. The Mongols killed with their, it is estimated that the Mongol invasion of Eurasia had a cost in human life of some 20 million people, which compared to the population of the time is an enormous number. And the Muslim also, who burnt Alexandria, also killed a lot of people. And so you see, books and people. But in between, there are periods when we develop science and we try to keep books alive. So next lecture will follow, and we will tell the story of the 12th century in Toledo and the Latin translation from Arabic that made a resurrection of science in the West. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer all of them. No questions?
No, everything is clear.
Everything is clear. I'm happy to hear that. So it means that we meet on Wednesday afternoon, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sort of sad that we lost some of the other listener, but you are affectionate and you follow. So let's go on. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.